Elias Carter had always lived a quiet life on the edge of the Arizona Territory. The land around him stretched wide and empty, filled with dry grass, tall rocks, and lonely winds that carried dust across the plains. His ranch sat far from town, built by his own two hands. People in town often said he preferred the company of horses more than humans. And most of the time, they were right. But Elias was not cold or harsh. He simply lived a simple life, free from noise and trouble. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air turned cool, Elias finished his work near the corral. He brushed dust off his shirt and looked toward the barn. The animals were restless, shifting and snorting softly, as if disturbed by something unusual. Elias narrowed his eyes, sensing something wasn't right. He moved slowly toward the barn door, his boots crunching against the dry ground. Inside the shadows near the barn wall, something moved. It was small, quiet, but unmistakably human. Elias stopped, keeping his voice gentle. "Who's there?" he asked softly. For a moment, there was no response. Then, from behind a stack of hay bales, a thin woman stepped forward slowly, like a frightened deer, unsure if it should run or stay. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders in loose strands, dusty and tangled from travel. Her clothes were worn, her feet tired, and her eyes held a deep fear that struck Elias straight in the heart. She was an Apache woman, but not one he recognized. She looked older than her years, as if life had been unkind to her for a long time. In her arms, she carried a small, wrapped bundle, though it seemed to hold only a few belongings. Elias raised a hand gently, more as a reflex to greet her than anything else. But the moment his hand lifted, everything changed. The woman gasped and dropped to her knees in the dirt. Her shoulders shook, and she pressed her forehead to the ground as she cried out in a trembling voice, "Stop! I'll be your obedient wife. Please don't hurt me." Elias froze where he stood. His hand slowly lowered to his side as shock washed over him. He had never heard such fear in a voice before, and the words struck him with a pain he didn't expect. He stared at her, unable to move for a moment. "No, no," he said quickly, kneeling down several feet away from her so she would not feel trapped. "I'm not going to hurt you. Please, look up. You don't have to say that." But the woman kept her head bowed, breathing fast, as if waiting for punishment. Elias swallowed, feeling his heart twist. He understood, without needing to ask, that she had suffered greatly before reaching his land. He placed his hat on the ground beside him to show he meant no harm. "Ma'am," he said in a soft voice, "you're safe here. I don't want anything from you. I just want to know if you're hurt or hungry." Slowly, as if unsure she should trust him, the woman lifted her face. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet with tears, and fear still shook her voice. Elias kept his distance, not moving an inch closer. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not that kind of man." The woman studied his expression, perhaps searching for anger or harshness, but finding none. Her shoulders relaxed only a little, just enough for her to breathe normally. "My name is Elias Carter," he continued calmly. "This is my ranch. You're welcome to rest if you need to. You can stay in the barn tonight where it's warm. I'll sleep outside so you feel safe." Her eyes widened at his words. She had likely expected commands, threats, or demands. Instead, she heard kindness. It confused her, and confusion often mixed with fear. But Elias didn't rush her. She finally spoke in a quiet whisper. "I am Nayeli." "Well, Nayeli," Elias replied, "you're safe now." He slowly stood and stepped back to give her space. Then he pointed toward the small water barrel near the barn entrance. "There's clean water there, if you want to drink. I won't come close." Nayeli hesitated before rising to her feet. Her movements were slow, cautious, as if ready to flee at the slightest hint of danger. Elias watched silently, keeping his hands low and visible. When she reached the water, she drank carefully, almost painfully, as if she hadn't tasted clean water in days. Elias went inside the small storeroom and returned with a folded blanket and a piece of bread. He placed them gently on a wooden crate, several steps away from her. "There," he said. "For you. Take your time." Nayeli stared at the food, then at him, as if trying to understand his intentions. Slowly, she approached and picked up the bread with trembling hands. She ate quietly while keeping her eyes fixed on him, unsure if this kindness was only temporary. Elias sat on an overturned bucket near the barn door, far enough not to make her nervous, but close enough to show he wasn't abandoning her in the night. After several minutes, he spoke again, careful not to sound forceful. "If you want," he said, "you can stay here for the night. The barn is warm, and the wind gets cold after sunset." Nayeli looked around the barn. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. "You won't hurt me?" she asked softly. Elias shook his head. "I won't even step foot inside once you're settled. I'll take the porch. You rest." Her eyes softened with a mix of disbelief and relief. No one had spoken to her like that in months. Most people turned away from her. Some spoke harshly, and a few treated her like she wasn't worth anything. But this cowboy, a stranger, offered gentle words and safety without asking for anything. Nayeli stepped fully into the barn and moved toward the corner where the hay bales were stacked. She placed her small bundle beside her and covered herself with the blanket Elias had given. For a moment, she watched him from the shadows, as if waiting for him to change his mind. But he didn't. Instead, he tipped his hat respectfully and walked toward the porch, settling himself with his back against the wall. The night grew darker, and the air grew colder. But Elias stayed outside as promised. Inside the barn, Nayeli listened to the calming sounds of the ranch, the soft breathing of horses, the rustle of hay, the gentle wind passing through the cracks in the wood. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small sense of peace. Not complete safety, but something close enough. Elias didn't sleep much. He thought about her words, about the fear in her voice when she begged him not to hurt her. It made him wonder what she had lived through, what kinds of people she had met before reaching his ranch. He knew that life on the frontier could be harsh, especially for someone like her alone, widowed, and far from her people. He looked toward the barn every now and then, making sure no wild animals approached. But he did not go inside. He had promised her she would be safe, and he meant every word. Hours passed slowly. The moon rose high, shining silver light across the ranch. Nayeli finally closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her into a deep sleep on the soft hay. She slept not because she fully trusted Elias yet, but because his kindness had given her a small break from fear. When morning finally came, the first thing she saw was sunlight filtering through the barn boards. The second thing she saw was Elias still sitting on the porch, his hat pulled low, clearly awake, but relaxed. For Nayeli, that simple sight meant more than he could ever understand. She had begged out of fear, expecting cruelty. But instead, she had found a man who answered her fear with gentleness. And that changed everything. The morning sun stretched across the Arizona plains, warming the land and brushing golden light across Elias Carter's ranch. The quiet of the early day was broken only by the soft rustling of the wind and the occasional neigh of a horse. Elias sat on the porch, his back straight, eyes scanning the horizon, though his thoughts were far away. He wondered how a single traveler, a fragile woman like Nayeli, could carry so much fear and sorrow and yet still survive. Inside the barn, Nayeli stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the sunlight that filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls. She took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of hay and animals, the faint earthy scent of the ranch, and something unfamiliar, the faint smell of kindness. It made her pause. For months, she had not felt safe anywhere. She had expected the morning to bring danger or shouting, yet everything was calm. Elias noticed her movement and gave her a small nod from the porch, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope you slept well." Nayeli hesitated, unsure how to respond. Sleep had come to her, yes, but peace was still a stranger. I slept," she replied quietly, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." The words were small, but they carried more meaning than she realized. It was the first time in months she had said, "Thank you," without fear twisting her tone. Elias smiled faintly, tipping his hat toward her. "You're welcome. Eat something if you can. I made breakfast." He reached inside the small cabin connected to the porch and returned with a simple plate of bread, some dried meat, and a small cup of water. It was not much, but it was enough for someone who had been traveling without proper food for days. Nayeli approached slowly, holding the blanket around her shoulders. She felt nervous, not knowing if this calm would last. But Elias simply set the plate down on the table, without a word, then stepped back. He did not rush her, he did not demand anything. That patience was new to her, and confusing, but slowly, she allowed herself to eat. As she took her first bites, she looked around the barn. The walls were bare, the floor dusty, yet it felt safe. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have to keep one hand on her bundle and one eye on the door. She could simply be. That simple act of safety was powerful, more than she could explain. Once she had eaten, Elias spoke again. "If you want, you can help a little around the ranch today. You don't have to, of course. Only if you feel like it." He did not raise his voice. He did not push her. The offer was simple and honest. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a test. It was trust. Nayeli considered it. She had never been treated like this before, never been given freedom and choice at the same time. Most people expected her to work without question, to obey, to serve. But Elias, he expected nothing, yet offered everything. She nodded slowly. I can help," she whispered. Unquote. She whispered. She whispered. Elias smiled faintly, and together, they stepped out into the morning light. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of dry grass and sun-warmed earth. The horses stirred, some curious, some indifferent. Elias handed Nayeli a small broom. "Start with sweeping the barn," he said. His tone was soft, instructional, not commanding. "The hay can be messy, and the animals will feel better with a clean floor." She bent down, picking up the broom, and began to sweep. The motions were slow, careful, but as she worked, she felt a strange sense of pride. Elias watched her from a short distance, silent but present. He didn't hover. He didn't push. He simply allowed her space to do her task. That, too, was a gift she had not known she needed. As the day passed, Nayeli began to tell small pieces of her story. She spoke cautiously at first, afraid that any word might bring anger or rejection. I lost my husband," she said quietly. "He was killed by raiders months ago. Since then, I have been moving from place to place. People, they are not kind. They shout, or worse." Elias listened carefully, his expression gentle, never interrupting, never judging. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said finally. "No one should be treated that way." Her eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were not from fear. They were from relief, from the feeling that someone actually understood her pain. For the first time, she spoke without trembling. She told him about her life in her village, the loss of her husband, and the loneliness that followed. She told him about the cold nights spent hiding in the desert, the hungry days, the constant worry that someone would take advantage of her fear. Elias heard everything, and he responded with patience, with understanding, with simple words that carried more warmth than any grand gesture could. By noon, they had moved outside. Elias showed her how to care for the animals, how to check the water barrels and refill them, how to feed the horses. He did not rush her, did not correct her harshly. Instead, he guided her gently, praised small successes, and offered help only when she asked. Nayeli began to feel capable, a feeling she had not known in months. Her hands were dirty, her arms tired, but a sense of accomplishment grew in her chest. As the sun climbed high in the sky, Nayeli paused to rest. She leaned against the fence, breathing in the warm air. Elias joined her, sitting a short distance away. They did not speak at first, simply observing the quiet of the land. For Nayeli, the silence was different. It was not empty or threatening. It was safe. After a few moments, she asked softly, "Why? Why are you so kind to me? Most people would have sent me away. Or, worse." Elias looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because I know what it is to be alone," he said simply. "I lost my parents when I was young. I built this ranch myself. I've seen people suffer. I know that kindness matters more than fear." Nayeli absorbed his words. They made sense, and yet, they were almost unbelievable. She had lived in a world where kindness was rare and fear was constant. But here, with this man, it was real. She felt something shift inside her, a small seed of trust. Fragile but growing. The afternoon passed with small chores, quiet conversation, and shared work. Elias allowed Nayeli to learn at her own pace. She began to laugh softly at small mistakes, a sound she had not made in a long time. She began to see that mistakes here were met with guidance, not anger. She began to hope, slowly, that perhaps life could be different. Later, a few neighboring ranchers rode by, curious about the newcomer. When they assumed she was Elias's servant or property, he spoke firmly. "She is free. She chooses to stay. No one has the right to speak for her." The neighbors nodded, surprised by his words, but Elias did not argue. He simply protected her, showing her in action what he had been saying all day. As the sun began to set, Elias and Nayeli returned to the barn. She arranged her small bundle, now feeling more secure. She looked around, at the hay, the walls, the small space she had claimed for herself. It was simple, yet it felt like home. She realized that staying here was not out of fear, but choice. She could leave at any moment, yet she stayed. Elias prepared a simple supper and offered it to her. She ate slowly, savoring the food and the calm that had settled over the ranch. The fear that had dominated her life all night and day began to fade. She still remembered it, still felt it lingering in the corners of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. Here, with Elias, she felt safe. She felt respected. She felt like a person again. After the meal, they sat quietly as the stars appeared above. Nayeli watched the sky, feeling a connection to the vast world around her. And yet, a sense of peace grounded her to this place. Elias sat nearby, not intruding, just being present. That presence was enough. For the first time in months, Nayeli slept through the night without trembling in fear. She knew challenges would come, that the world outside could still be cruel. But she also knew that there was at least one place where she was safe. One person who saw her not as a fear or a tool, but as a human being. And as she drifted off, she felt something new. Hope. A quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be different. That there could be kindness, trust, and safety. And for Nayeli, that was more powerful than anything she had lost.